and then learn a little bit of the language, if possible. This is huge. Bare minimum, you should always at least learn like hello, thank you, goodbye, how are you? No matter where you go. No matter, and that never takes more than like 15 minutes. 15 minutes online, you can learn those 4 basic phrases no matter what, no matter where you go. Languages have an amazing, like I'd say the first 100 words of a language is amazingly useful. Amazingly useful. For no other reason than like people, locals, just their respect for you jumps up like 20 times. And if you can actually say sentences and say a few things to them, it's like they treat you like a king. Like it's, especially in these places, like if you go to like Czech Republic or Brazil or you know, Slovakia or something where like nobody ever bothers to learn anything in their language, and then you show up and you actually can speak like a few phrases, they treat you completely differently. Completely differently. And that goes for everything from the service staff to taxi drivers to bouncers to bartenders to waiters at restaurants. They all get super impressed. And then of course girls that you meet, they get super impressed. They get really excited. And it's actually language, like, it's really blown me away. Language learning is like one of the biggest, for foreign women, like you have to realize as a native English speaker, it's basically, most native English speakers never bother learning another language, basically because we don't have to. Everybody else has to learn English. And so most native English speakers never bother to learn anything. And if you go most places in the world, most places they're a little bit frustrated that English speakers never bother to learn their language and they have to sit there and study English all the time. And sometimes they're a little bit bitter about it. I mean, the French are the most famous, but it's a little bit true everywhere. Like they're a little bit true everywhere that they're a little bit frustrated by it. And so it's not only that you speak a little bit of their language, but the fact that you're a native English speaker and you took the time to learn a little bit of Portuguese or learn a little bit of Italian, like it goes a long way. And they get really excited about it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about cultures. I'm going to make a lot of generalizations here, so like don't anybody get offended. Obviously there's exceptions and things are dynamic and it varies from country to country, but I'm going to make some generalizations about regions just in terms of what to expect. So the first thing is English-speaking countries, UK, Ireland, Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand. Say what you want, we have extremely similar cultures, and in the grand scheme of things, I mean honestly, if there was an Aussie or a Brit in here, they'd fucking kill me. But honestly, in the grand scheme of things, we basically have the same cultures. We're very sarcastic. We don't display our emotions very openly. We have very strong drinking cultures. We use a lot of teasing as ways of showing affection. Sexuality is shamed a little bit. It's seen as something a little bit shameful that you're not supposed to do out in the open. Obviously, there are variations in between each culture, but they all exhibit these traits to some degree. The other interesting thing about English speakers is that, in general, we love each other's accents, and this is not true for most languages. For instance, Brazilians and Portuguese, they hate each other's accents. People from Spain and Latin America hate each other's accents. Like, they talk a lot of shit about each other. English speakers, we love each other's accents. A Brit comes to the US, he's a rock star. Like when I go to England, I lived in England for a while and it got frustrating because I'd meet girls and they'd be like, oh my God, say awesome again. And I'd be like, that's awesome. They'd be like, oh my God, say it again. And I'm like, that's awesome. They're like, oh my God, listen, come here, Beth, listen. I'm like, oh my God, seriously? We love each other's accents. Get very excited about each other's accents. It's the same thing in Australia. It's the same thing if Australians come here. so on and so on. That's a little bit rare. Europe, I guess I'd say continental Europe. Continental Europeans are a little bit shyer. They're more social circle oriented. So one thing that's a little bit unique about English speaking culture is that it's really like it's not weird. Like, this is the irony. In English speaking culture, it's not weird to walk up to random girls you don't know and like hit on them. Like, it's kind of seen, like, people, like, it's kind of normal for us. But at the same time, we think a lot of girls think it's creepy or weird. Or a lot of people think it's creepy or weird. If you go to continental Europe, it's not nearly as common, but they don't really see it as creepy. They don't see it as weird. They're just like, oh, hello, it's another person. Like, how are you today? You know, there's not a lot of anxiety or shame attached to it. When you get into the Latin cultures, like Spain, Italy, it is a lot more common, but there's not any shame tied to it. You know, it's like Spanish guys run around and hit on girls, and it's not a big deal. But they are very cliquish. They're very social circle oriented. They're much more oriented about, I'm here with my friends, and so I hang out with my friends, and my friends introduce me to girls. It's not a huge difference, but it's noticeable. Latin America, far more emotionally expressive. Far more emotionally expressive, both the men and the women. Very jealous, and a little bit possessive, and surprisingly, interestingly, a lot of infidelity that goes on down there. Like, when I lived in Colombia, girls would ask me, they're like, so are you married? And I'd be like, no. And they're like, do you have any kids? And I'm like, no. And they're like, girlfriend, how many girlfriends do you have? And I'm like, none. And they're like, you're lying to me. And I'm like, no. And like, they're like, no, you're tall and you're handsome and you're nice. You definitely have girlfriends. It's okay though, I don't care. I'm like, okay. Like, they're so used to men lying about being married and having girlfriends that they just basically, if they think you're attractive, they basically assume that you're lying until you prove otherwise. And then ironically, they get very, very jealous if you go talk to another girl. So it's Latin culture. Asian culture, more withdrawn, more reserved, big on respect and courtesy. It's very big on politeness. Girls are very submissive. It's seen as kind of rude or in a lot of the cultures there, it's seen as rude or unattractive for a woman to contradict or go against what the guy she's interested in is saying or doing. Some men like this. I don't at all. I get turned off immediately. I'm like, please have a thought for yourself. Like, you can think for yourself, honestly. It's true, white people have a major advantage there. Black people have a major disadvantage. It's weird. A lot of Asian cultures are just openly racist, and they don't care. Like, I honestly sat down with a girl in China, and she's like, "Oh, I hate black people," and I'm like, "What?" She's like, "No, I don't like them," and I'm like, "Why not?" And she's like, "Just don't like them." I'm like, "Okay." Jeez. Openly racist. Interesting though. I mean, it goes both ways. It's very, very interesting. Huge language barriers in Asia as well. It's like when you're in Europe, you can kind of like, if you're in like Holland or Germany or something, you can kind of like decipher what people are talking about. And you can, like, some words sound similar to the English words. You go to China, forget it. Like, you have no idea what they're talking about. What else am I forgetting? Africa, I have no idea. Don't get AIDS. Eastern Europe. It's a favorite of mine. Eastern Europe, the girls are ridiculously hot. Eastern Europe, I mean, it's a, like whatever, like the whole communism thing, what it did over there, like Stalinism, World War II. There's still a major population imbalance. There's still a lot more women than men. The women are gorgeous. They're educated. They're stylish. They're more educated than the men are. Most of them get stuck, like taking care of men, of these like drunk kind of imbeciles. And it's weird. I mean, the men are all like brutish and like not very attractive, and the women are stunning. The weird thing about Eastern European cultures that is difficult, was difficult for me to wrap my head around, is basically like they show nothing. Like it's basically until they know you well, they give you nothing. You have no idea what they're thinking, what they're feeling. It's really disorienting. And then once they decide they like you, they're like huge and like their heart's on their sleeve. Like it's just everything. They just gush about anything to you. It was very disorienting for me there because, I mean, the women basically expect you to be so aggressive that in Western culture it would be like molestation. Like if you're not molesting her, she just assumes you don't like her. It's just like really ridiculous and interesting. They drink a lot as well. Well, Russians drink a lot. So hopefully I haven't offended anybody. One thing, another factor that you're going to run into on the road that you don't have to deal with in the States, which is an unfortunate reality, is prostitution. Particularly and like really, basically the poorer the country, the more of an issue it's going to be. But you run into it. I mean, in Europe, it's not such a problem. In Europe, they have red light districts, so they push all the prostitutes to red light districts. In Asia and parts of Latin America, and from what I hear, Africa, it's not so clear cut. So if you're in a developing country, in a poor country, if you're in some place, say like Dominican Republic or Colombia or Cuba or Thailand or Cambodia, you're going to run into a situation where there's going to be, basically any nightlife, there's going to be a lot of prostitutes. And some of them are going to be very, very obvious. They're really obvious. Basically, the rule with prostitutes is, if it sounds too good to be true, then it is. And, we like to think, as guys, we have big egos, and we want to think like, yeah, she's all over me. And especially when we drink a little bit. But if it's too good to be true, it is. And typically, most prostitutes will be upfront with you. They'll be like, yeah, I charge money for this. But they will try to seduce you. Unfortunately, there are some prostitutes who will actually intentionally try to make you think that they're not prostitutes. And then the next day or whatever, like, they'll demand money or they'll steal money or whatever. So you have to be on your guard. You have to be careful. It really sucks. I honestly, like, I will say this. It's an interesting experience to have attractive women try to seduce you, try to convince you to do something that you wouldn't normally want to do. It gives you a lot of perspective and a lot of respect for like what women in our culture go through. Getting hit on a guy that they're not sure about or they don't completely trust, and having to figure out what his intentions are. Basically, you get put in that exact same situation. You're at a club in Bangkok or something. There are a lot of normal girls there, but there are going to be prostitutes there, and you start talking to a girl, and she's kind of like, she's very flirtatious, and you don't know what her situation is. Honestly, it sucks too. I mean, prostitution really just ruins the dating. Unless you're into that thing, which, hey, if you want to do that, that's fine. Unless you're into that, it really just ruins kind of the dating situation of the area that you're in. Because even if you find girls that aren't prostitutes, they're going to immediately assume that you're a sex tourist. And so they're not going to be interested in you. And then even if you do find one who is interested in you, you're going to be so paranoid that she's a prostitute and she's going to steal your fucking iPod that, like, it's just not going to be enjoyable. So, unless you're in that kind of thing, I'd say avoid those areas. Unfortunately, there's some. The only places you really can't avoid it are like Southeast Asia, like Thailand. It's everywhere. Cambodia, it's everywhere. You know, places like Bali, it's all over the place. So it's just an unfortunate reality. We're going to talk about backpacking. So for those of you who don't know, backpacking is basically these things called hostels. It's not nearly as popular in the US, so, but if you go to Europe, South America, anywhere, there's these things called hostels, and they're basically like glorified dorm rooms. You show up, they pack like 8 bunk beds in a single room, and they charge you, it's really cheap. It's like $15 a night, $20 a night. So it's a cheap way to travel, and it's typically a bunch of young, kind of broke travelers. So if you go stay in one, you know, it'll be, say, 10 to 15 young travelers, you know, people aged 18 to 25 or 30. Most of them will be Western foreigners. Most of them will be English, Aussie, French, Spanish, Brazilian, whatever. So it's a cool and fun way to meet people. It's a very easy way to meet people. The problems with hostels is that they're grimy, they're dirty, they're cramped. You like wake up in the middle of the night and there's some British guy like vomiting all over the bathroom, and you're like, fuck, I gotta get up and shower in 3 hours because I have to take a train, and you know, the girl on the other side of the room is snoring and farting, and like it's not an enjoyable, like, bored experience. But if you want to travel on a budget, it's the way to go. And it can be a lot of fun. A lot of hostels have a big party scene. They're hostels that particularly specialize in like parties. Like, they're called party hostels. So you can go stay at party hostels. They sponsor parties most nights of the week. They have pub crawls where they take all of the travelers and you go out and you go drinking together. So it can be really cool ways to meet people very easily. Generally, backpacking girls tend to be two things. One is they're bad hygiene and not particularly cute. And two, they're very easy. So pick your poison. It can be fun for a night or two, but ultimately it's a little bit superficial, because, you know, as much fun as you have, every hostel, it's like, you know, 20% of the people leave the next day, and 20 more come in, and so it's like any 3-day period, there's a turnover, and you don't ever see those people again, and which is fine for a while, but after like a month or two, it gets tiring, and you start to feel like talking to these people, like you start having the same conversations over and over, and it feels a little bit pointless. So I think hostels are really good in small doses. I think they're really good for short trips. I think they're really good for very touristy places. You know, like if you're gonna go to like Rome and you want people like to go see the Colosseum with, like, it's cool for that. But if you're gonna settle in somewhere and like really dig into a place, I don't think it's a good solution. When you book hostels, always book a private room. Private rooms are usually about 50% more. It's worth it. I mean, if you have any money, it's worth it. Not only just for like getting a good night's rest and not dealing with all the shenanigans going on, but you have a place to take a girl if you do hook up.